At night, I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. We begin with a Fox News alert. Tonight, President Trump begins his MAGA rally blitz, a final push to turn out Republican voters. He just kicked off in Florida tonight. 10 more MAGA rallies are scheduled across the country over the next 5 days. But as we get closer to election night, the races get even tighter. We have got brand new Fox polls on key Senate races that prove they are not called battleground states for nothing. And in a high-stakes gambit, the president pushing his immigration agenda, from sending thousands of troops to the border to deal with the migrant caravans to possibly finding a way to end birthright citizenship. Is that going to be a plus or a minus? We'll ask Texas Senator Republican Ted Cruz. He's here at a Fox News at Night exclusive in the midst of his Cruise to Victory bus tour. But first, here's Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry with the latest on immigration. Good evening, Ed.
Good to see you, Shannon. Critics are saying these moves are all about the president trying to rally his base in the midterms, though, in fact, he promised a lot of these steps back in the 2016 race and is following through on that campaign promise to finally crack down on illegal immigration. And he's getting a dramatic nonpartisan boost tonight from the Defense Secretary, James Mattis, who, as we know, does not always see eye to eye with the president. It started out as the president sending 5,000 U.S. troops to the southern border, but he declared tonight he's basically tripling down, vowing to send up to 15,000 troops to deal with what are maybe multiple caravans right now, Central American migrants, which is the caravans are still many miles away, though at this point the Pentagon is estimating a deployment of roughly 7,000 troops across California, Arizona, and Texas. And the president also none too pleased tonight with the outgoing Speaker Paul Ryan in his assessment that it will take a long congressional process instead of an executive order to change the 14th Amendment and end automatic citizenship for the kids of undocumented immigrants who are born here. The president firing back in a tweet called Paul Ryan should be focusing on holding the majority rather than giving his opinions on birthright citizenship, something he knows nothing about. Our new Republican majority will work on this, closing the immigration loopholes and securing our border. Well, some Republicans on the Hill not happy tonight that the president is battling with the man trying to help him save that GOP majority in the House. But remember the context. The president believes Ryan and other Washington insiders have let him down on funding for the wall, for example. So he's determined to frame these midterms the way he wants, around border security, while Democrats are charging this shows the military is being used for a political strategy. Well, the defense secretary poured cold water on that one. Watch.
As far as the caravan, which is very dangerous, you see what's been happening. Our military is out. We have about 5,008. We'll go up to anywhere between 10 and 15,000 military personnel on top of Border Patrol, ICE, and everybody else at the border. Nobody's coming in. We're not allowing people to come in.
The support that we provide to the Secretary for Homeland Security is practical support based on the requests from the Commissioner of Customs and Border Police, and so we don't do stunts in this department.
The Democrats want to continue giving automatic birthright citizenship to every child born to an illegal alien, and they are all made instantly eligible for every privilege and benefit of American citizenship at a cost of billions of dollars a year.
Well, the president may be getting help from two Democrats. Senator Joe Donnelly, facing a tight re-election in Indiana, says he's open to legislation to change all that, while the president also touted a 25-year-old speech by former Senator Harry Reid in which he said no sane country would allow people to break our laws and then have a child and reward that kid with citizenship. Well, Reid today put out a statement clarifying that he believes he made a mistake in 1993 and pulled back on that legislation after his wife told him it was a bad idea, Shannon.
All right, we all evolve and change some of our thoughts on certain things over time. Ed Henry, thank you very much. All right, we have brand new Fox News polls tonight as key battleground Senate races are setting up for potential photo finishes. If these polls are right, Trace Gallagher joins us to break down the numbers. Good evening, Trace.
Good evening, Shannon. They are the very definition of battlegrounds. With 6 days left before the midterms, 3 of the 5 U.S. Senate races in battleground states could go either way, and the other 2 states are only leaning Republican. Let's begin in Arizona. Democrat Kristen Sinema and Republican Martha McSally are now deadlocked at 46% each. That's a bad trend for Sinema, who was up by 2 points in early October and up by 3 in September. But here's the wild card. Sinema holds a 2-to-1 advantage among his Hispanic voters, and that could certainly push the contest in her direction until you consider that the number of Hispanic voters extremely interested in the election trails non-Hispanic whites by 15 points. Lack of interest historically translates to lack of turnout, and that would hurt Sinema. Meantime, over the past 2 months, the Indiana Senate race has seen a significant shift in the poll numbers. Back in September, GOP challenger Mike Braun was up by 2 points over Democratic incumbent Joe Donnelly. In early October, Donnelly was up by 2, and now Donnelly has increased that lead to 7 points. Now, that's still within the margin of error, but trending in the wrong way for Mike Braun, though the good news for Braun is that Donnelly still can't get over that 50% mark. The Show Me State Senate race is a toss-up. Missouri Democratic incumbent Claire McCaskill and her Republican challenger Josh Hawley are tied at 43%. That's the exact same number as early October, and the variables are almost evenly split as well. For example, men break for Hawley, women for McCaskill, though it appears more Democrats than Republicans are extremely interested in the election, even though 54% of likely Missouri voters approve of the president's job performance. In North Dakota, the incumbent there, Heidi Heitkamp, is trailing Republican Kevin Cramer by 9 points, 51-42. Cramer's lead is down from early October, but he is still above 50%, and many more North Dakotans identify as Republicans, plus Donald Trump won North Dakota by 36 points. Finally, Tennessee. In the race to replace retiring GOP Senator Bob Corker, Republican Marsha Blackburn is pulling away from Democrat and former Tennessee Governor Phil Bredesen. Blackburn is up 50 to 41% among likely voters, and 9 points is outside the margin of error. She was only up by 5 in early October. Tennesseans identify as Republicans by a 20-point margin, but hey, Taylor Swift just threw her support behind Bredesen, so you never know. Shannon.
You never know when celebs get involved, whether it's going to be a plus or minus for these folks. In the meantime, Trace Gallagher, thank you very much. With the president doubling down on his sudden focus on birthright citizenship as a key issue, Texas Democratic Senate candidate Beto O'Rourke says not only must we protect the 14th Amendment, but we must also protect the 200,000 dreamers from across Texas from the fear of deportation. His opponent, Republican Senator Ted Cruz, joins us now from Amarillo amid a campaign bus tour. Senator, thanks for taking a break, making some time for us tonight.
Shannon, it's great to be with you. Thank you for having me on.
All right, you are an accomplished Supreme Court advocate. I've seen you in action over there. You said before trying to take this to court and win on those grounds of getting rid of birthright citizenship as part of outlawing, not outlawing, but interpreting the 14th Amendment in a different way. You said it's an uphill battle, but you've also said more recently the policy doesn't make sense. So where do you stand on that?
Well, listen, as a policy matter, President Trump is exactly right. That birthright citizenship doesn't make any sense. Most of the countries on earth, if you're there illegally and you have a child, that child doesn't get automatic citizenship. And there's no reason that we should grant that. What it ends up doing is incentivizing illegal immigration. We need to be securing the border and stopping illegal immigration. So I agree with the president. I've long agreed with ending birthright citizenship as a policy matter. Now, how to do it, there's a debate among legal scholars. Some legal scholars argue the only way to do it is with a constitutional amendment. Other legal scholars argue that you can do it with a statute passed by Congress. I think whatever happens, it's going to be litigated. The courts are ultimately going to resolve this. And the president has suggested that he may try to do it with an executive order. I haven't seen the legal arguments for what the authority would be to do it with an executive order. But my view is whatever means is used, the policy is the right policy, that we should not be encouraging illegal immigration.
We're going to have a legal debate on it with some experts tonight as well on the show. But as the policy matter stands for now, right now in Texas, the latest Q poll has Hispanic support split this way. Beto O'Rourke gets 60%, you get 36%. Texas is a very interesting, very diverse state. What do you plan to do to try to win over the Hispanic vote in these closing days into the midterms?
Well, listen, we are barnstorming the state, every part of the state. I got to tell you, we were down in the Rio Grande Valley just a couple of days ago. We had 2,000 people come out in Harlingen. We had 2,000 people come out in Mission. We had over 1,000 people come out in Laredo. And one of the things that Democrats and Beto O'Rourke and the national media get wrong is they think the way that you earn Hispanic votes in Texas is you go to the left. You do what Beto has done, and you support open borders, you support amnesty, you support socialism, and that's just not the case. Hispanics in Texas, our community is a conservative community. The values that resonate in our community are faith and family and patriotism and the American dream. And Texas Hispanics don't want open borders. If you look at Beto O'Rourke's record on immigration, it is terrible. I mean, he supports tearing down the border walls we have. He supports sanctuary cities. He opposes Kate's Law. I'm the author of Kate's Law in the Senate. I think that's the sort of common sense legislation that Hispanics in Texas and everybody else want to see enacted.
Well, and that's something you guys have debated very hotly. Immigration, a top issue, but also polling shows that the other, just ahead of that in the #1 slot, is health care. I want to run a little bit of an ad that Beto is running and give you a chance to respond.
Ted Cruz has voted to take away health care from millions of American families. He's tried repeatedly to roll back protections for pre-existing conditions, and he shut down the government for 16 days because he thought too many people had too much health care.
Polls show that people trust potential voters, Democrats more, to handle the issue of health care. It is something they're campaigning very heavily on this fall. So how do you respond to his accusations?
Well, listen, Beto knows what he's saying there is false, and he's looking in the TV camera and deliberately telling falsehoods. I have been very clear. I've got a legislative record on this. Last year when we were debating repealing Obamacare has been a disaster for Texans and people all across the country. It has driven premiums through the roof. The average family's premiums have risen over $5,000 a year. And I introduced legislation. It was called the Consumer Freedom Amendment. The Consumer Freedom Amendment, what it said is if a health insurance company sells a policy in a state that meets the Title I mandates, including pre-existing conditions, including everything else, that it can also sell any other policy that consumers desire. And HHS, the Health and Human Services Agency, they had their actuaries and their experts score the Consumer Freedom Amendment. Here's what they found. The Consumer Freedom Amendment, which I introduced, would have expanded health insurance coverage by over 2 million people. More than 2 million additional people would have health insurance. But it would also drive down premiums by an average of over $5,000 a year, all while protecting pre-existing conditions. And so Beto O'Rourke is deliberately trying to mislead Texans. My position, we are going to protect pre-existing conditions, period. And that was the legislation I introduced. It kept that protections, but it also lowers premiums. You know what Beto wants instead? Is he wants full-on socialized medicine. He wants the federal government in charge of your health care, which would produce scarcity, it would produce waiting times, it would produce rationing, and it would also bankrupt Medicare. That's not what the people of Texas want.
Well, we'll find out next week which senator they want. Senator Ted Cruz, thank you for dropping in on your barnstorming tour. Good to have you tonight.
Thank you, Shannon. And let me encourage everyone at home. Number one, come out and vote. It's early voting tomorrow and Friday. Election day is Tuesday. We need every Texan to come out and vote. And come to our website, tedcruz.org, and contribute. We're getting outspent 3-1. This is a battle for the future, the direction of the country, the future of Texas.
Thank you, Senator. All right, sounding confident heading into the midterms, President Trump says a new Republican majority will get to work on things like birthright citizenship. Section 1 of the 14th Amendment reads, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Joining us now, Fox News contributor, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney Andrew McCarthy, and former Deputy Assistant Attorney General John Yoo. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks, Shannon. Hi.
Okay, so there's a lot out there, including very thoughtful things from both of you. Let me start with this from Jonathan Turley, writing in USA Today. He says, the meaning of these words, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, those words might be answered by the newly reconstructed court with two Trump appointees, Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh. The textual and historical arguments supporting the narrower interpretation are likely to appeal to those justices and could leave Chief Justice John Roberts as the swing vote. Andrew, I'll start with you. Where do you think this goes if it winds up at SCOTUS?
Well, I think it's an uphill battle. I was very much in sympathy with what Senator Cruz had to say. I think it's a very bad policy to give birthright citizenship to the children of illegal aliens. On the other hand, as a legal matter, I think it's difficult to reverse. I do think, Shannon, that the lower the species of law that it would go up to the Supreme Court under, the more difficult it would be to reverse the policy. And what I mean by that is, if the president tried to do this by executive order, I don't think he can. I think there's been, statutes of Congress that have been out there that have codified the 14th Amendment for years that we've been operating under. That means Congress has asserted itself here. I don't think the president can reverse that by executive order. I think even if you got legislation, it's 50-50 at best whether the Supreme Court would sign off on it, and an amendment is very tough. It's a heavy lift.
It is a huge lift. Okay, so there are other scholars out there, conservatives, who say this isn't what it seems on its face, that when you get to those words and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, that's the turning point. Hans von Spakovsky over at the Daily Signal writes this: the fact that a tourist or illegal alien is subject to our laws and our courts if they violate our laws while they're here does not place them within the political, quote, jurisdiction of the United States, as that phrase was defined by the framers of the 14th Amendment. What do you say, John?
I think Hans, unfortunately, and other of my conservative friends are mistaken. That phrase, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, actually applies to three discrete groups of people at that time in 1867, 1868, when this amendment was drafted and ratified. It applies to Indians. Those have been the largest group who are not considered subject to the laws of the United States, even though they're on the territory. Foreign diplomats, and in the unlikely event, occupying enemy soldiers. So it's very precise language. Put that language aside. The history of the country from the beginning, from the founding in 1788-89, all the way to the present, the traditional understanding has been if you are born in the United States, no matter whether your parents are citizens or not, you're a citizen of the United States. There have been Supreme Court opinions, the practice of the government. So the interpretation that Hans and my other conservative friends are making, it's interesting, but it would require the Supreme Court to overrule its own precedents, those of the practice of the government, and I think the widely held understanding of most legal experts and scholars for 200 years.
I want to ask you both quickly to weigh in very quickly on the same idea. Does Congress do something on this? Lindsey Graham, Senator Lindsey Graham, has said he's going to introduce something. Andy, do you think they get it done?
No, not anytime soon, no.
Well, especially not if Democrats win the House. John, what do you think?
I don't see how this moves out of Congress. I think a lot of Republicans would vote against it. Plus, I think this is one of the rules that makes America, I believe we're an exceptional nation. And the fact that all the other countries in the world, especially old Europe, have the rule that your parents' citizenship, your blood determines your citizenship, is a reason why America should keep the traditional rule.
Well, and you know that people point to the fact that Canada and America are really some of the only Western and developed nations that still have this policy. Much of Europe does not anymore. All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. Great to have a legal debate with you, as always.
Thanks, Shannon.
Thanks, Shannon.
All right, next up, you're going to see the president in these battleground polls. He's kicking off a midterm MAGA rally blitz as they come in. Is he firing up both sides to turn out? Plus, do intensely personal attacks against the commander-in-chief hurt or help him?
The most racist, sexist, homophobic, bigoted president in history.
And later, after a bitter confirmation fight, how is Justice Brett Kavanaugh settling in at the High Court? I'll give you an inside look at how he's doing at the Supreme Court. Effect appear to propel Republican candidates shortly after a big MAGA rally. So the president's going all out for the next few days, hosting 10 more rallies across the nation, focusing on illegal immigration. And tonight, President Trump's calling out the media yet again. White House correspondent Kevin Corke is live from Florida. Now, Kevin, I did hear him say some nice things. He said there are some good reporters out there. Gave some credit.
Yeah, he did. He didn't mention anybody by name. But, yeah, he did take aim at the media, broadly speaking. And you know what? That's probably going to be sort of the theme, right, over the next several days. But while he was taking aim, he was also encouraging, Shannon, the more than 10,000 folks inside the arena to not only get out there and vote on November 6th, but he was also imploring them to be well, let's just say it, skeptical about what they hear and what they read in the press between now and Election Day. In fact, he accused the press of intentionally fomenting distrust and dissension.
We have forcefully condemned hatred, bigotry, racism, and prejudice in all of its ugly forms. But the media doesn't want you to hear your story. It's not my story, it's your story. And that's why 33% of the people in this country believe the fake news is, in fact, and I hate to say this, in fact, the enemy of the people.
Now, when he wasn't pounding the press, the president was actually promoting the candidacies of Governor Rick Scott for U.S. Senate and Congressman Ron DeSantis for Florida governor. He also warned against the dangers of a Democrat-controlled Congress.
This election is truly a choice between results and resistance. How about their whole theme? Obstruct, resist. What the hell do you get out of that? This is really an election between greatness and gridlock.
President Trump, not the only president making multiple stops here in the Sunshine State. Ahead of Tuesday's election, former President Barack Obama will be back here in Florida on Friday, hoping once again to turn out the vote for Democrats across the state. Now tomorrow, Shannon, the midterm mad dash continues for the president as he makes his way to the Show Me state of Missouri. In fact, that's the first of two stops he'll make there, and then it's off to West Virginia and other spots. We'll be checking the map as we go along. Of course, we'll have live coverage for you, but for now, back to you.
Yeah, big names out for all these big races. Kevin Corke, thank you for being with us tonight, live from Florida. Well, independent Senator Bernie Sanders, an avowed socialist, holding a dueling rally in Florida campaigning for Democratic gubernatorial candidate Andrew Gillum. Sanders called on college students to get out and vote. And last night, Sanders said this about the president.
They are working to make certain that the agenda of the most racist, sexist, homophobic, bigoted president in history will go nowhere because Democrats will control the House and the Senate.
All right, let's talk about it with tonight's Power Panel. David Catanese is the senior politics writer for U.S. News and World Report. Saagar Enjeti is the White House correspondent for the Daily Caller. And Mark Lauder, former press secretary for Vice President Pence. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
All right, who thinks that the president is going to turn out both sides, motivate both sides to left and right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
That's what he's doing. I think in pointing to Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, they're talking to base voters. No one's trying to persuade anyone anymore. I think it's interesting where the president's map is. He's going to safe red areas. So that means he's not trying to convince anyone. He is trying to get out the MAGA crowd. And I think even in Southwest Florida tonight was where he was. Those are Republican voters. That's a Republican area. So convincing people is over. This is a base election, and that's why we're going to these more extreme arguments. I think.
And Saagar, I mean, so much of this is about turning people out. And we've seen this enthusiasm gap between the two parties closing, especially in the wake of Kavanaugh. But there's been a little time, and memories are so short, and cycles are so quick, that we're on to other things now. And the Democrats still have an advantage when it comes to enthusiasm, and they're at least telling pollsters their plans to show up. And that sounds good for the House, for Democrats.
That does sound good for the House, and that's what they're very enthusiastic about. But there's a reason that the president's talking about immigration, and he's pointing at the caravan, he's talking about birthright citizenship, and it's like David was just saying, it's a base election. This is something that gets people very motivated to see thousands and thousands of people marching towards the United States with the declared intention of breaking the law, but also they're looking at the fact that border arrivals are up at a record number, and that this is something that really concerns them. So he's going to all of these Senate areas where he hopes, I think, internal consensus within the White House is the House is generally not going to happen. But you could pick up 2 to 3 seats in the Senate, and that's what the map reflects.
Yeah, let's talk about Arizona, where one of the states where immigration is a hot button issue for sure, and where this race has been so incredibly tight between two members of Congress. You've got the Democrat Kyrsten Sinema and, of course, the Republican Martha McSally. Our poll out today, Fox News poll, shows this now at a dead heat at 46% each. McSally's been trailing Mark, but now it looks like, it's literally too close to call with any real certainty.
There are so many of those races out there, and that's why the president, the vice president's travel schedule is so important. They will be doing, in addition to their rallies, they're going to be making robocalls. You're going to see Don Jr., you're going to see the other kids out there. Everyone is going to be fully engaged over the next 5 days or so to get that vote out. And ultimately, I think this feels a lot like 16 to me, where the polls are still not accurately capturing all of the Republican enthusiasm.
Well, but we know for certain over the last year or two, the resist and the blue wave and those kinds of things, there's a resist flag hanging up in my neighborhood on one of the houses there. I think they might have changed it out, but it's been out there for a while. So we know that that is a very real thing, David. I mean, that enthusiasm is definitely building. And some of these races, like we talked to Senator Ted Cruz a little bit earlier, people all along have said, that race should not be that tight in Texas.
Yeah, and I think that's where the maps are going to diverge and why we could have something really historic happen, where you have big gains for the Democrats in the House in suburban districts that may have voted for the president and are now turned off by him. So you could see 30 seats, maybe 35 seat pickup for the Dems in the House, but Republicans winning in states like Missouri, Indiana, North Dakota, red states, but those are his base states. So in the end, this will not be a realignment election. This is going to be both sides hardening in their strengths. Suburban, college-educated white folks and some minorities on the Democratic side, and then white working class, white males in rural areas for the Republican side.
Saagar, how do you think the president is going to do if the Democrats take the House? I mean, there's some who say he kind of likes having a foil. He would like to spend 2 years fighting back and forth with a House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, if indeed she holds on in that leadership battle. And there are some questions about a potential legitimate challenge there. But how do you think he's going to react if he has to wake up the day after and say, okay, we lost the House?
The president will relish the fight. I think it's the White House staff who are going to suffer the most. We're going to have to prepare the oversight documents for all of the hundreds of inquiries that they're going to get day after day after day. You're going to see cabinet officers dragged before Congress. He relishes the fight. He'll get down and he'll punch right back. But it will just overturn the political operation of the White House, and it will make it so that working there every day is just a constant back and forth fight of document requests and fights with the House leadership, and that's just not a great environment to be in heading into re-election.
Well, and a lot of the investigations, almost all of the investigations that are going now into the DOJ and the FBI and the Andy McCabe and all of that, I think all of those shut down. And then, as you said, there are all new investigations by the same oversight and other committees. I want to touch, Mark, on one other completely tight poll that we have out of Missouri. This is with the Democrat incumbent, Senator Claire McCaskill, now tied at 43-43 with Josh Hawley. She's held on before, but we know Democrats or incumbents are in danger when they're consistently pulling under 50%. Sounds like people, though, there's still some undecideds there.
There's still some undecideds, and I think there is a lot of enthusiasm there. Josh Hawley has run a great race there. And you will see both the president, the vice president there multiple times. I'm actually traveling with the vice president there on Friday and then on to our home state of Indiana to join the president in the last minute. This is an all-out fight, and I'm not saying this because it's Halloween. For Republicans who may not come out to vote, I have two words: Speaker Pelosi and Chairwoman Maxine Waters.
Well,
that's 3 words.
I just say to people, anyone out there, I don't want to hear any complaints, no matter what side you're on. If you didn't register and you didn't get out to vote, it's on you. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. Great to see all of you. All right, some Democrats worried about the party's engagement with African-American voters. After Hillary Clinton's controversial comments, yet another Democrat makes his own comments, getting him in a lot of trouble about minorities on his staff.
Our director of all constituent services, she's African-American, but she does an even more incredible job than you could ever imagine.
And later, the Republican Governors Association once identified the best chance to pick up a seat was in Alaska, but now the Republicans' lead has evaporated. There's some changing math there. We're going to preview the race and explain what's happening after the break. Hillary Clinton makes a comment many are calling racist. Another Democrat makes controversial comments about minorities on his staff. And that's not all. Ellison Barber reports.
On Twitter, Missouri Democratic State Senator Maria Chappelle-Nadal attacked a fellow Democrat, one who happens to be in a tough re-election bid. Claire McCaskill is desperate. She tweeted, "She deserves to lose. She is not a Democrat." Chappelle-Nadal also posted screen grabs of threats and racial slurs she's received online. At issue is something Senator McCaskill said on Fox News.
We have a state senator here in Missouri that actually advocated for the assassination of President Trump. That's a crazy Democrat.
Chappelle-Nadal is the state senator who made those remarks shortly after Charlottesville. She later said she did not mean it, but spoke out of frustration. Chappelle-Nadal writes Claire McCaskill and her racist Democratic friends continue to alienate the base. That remains to be seen, but Chappelle Nadal's criticism of McCaskill comes at a time when Democrats are attempting to court African-American voters in competitive Senate races in states President Trump won.
There's a long-standing tension about Democrats taking African-American voters for granted. And President Trump has tried to stoke this tension by telling them, you know, your life didn't improve under Democratic policies. And so all of these Democrats who are trying to defend their seats in states Trump won, some by landslide proportions, are trying to appeal to the middle. At the same time, they're trying to get their base voters out.
Debates like this, candidates accused of making racially insensitive or racist remarks, are not owned by one party. In Florida, accusations of racism have plagued the Republican gubernatorial candidate, Ron DeSantis.
This is a debate where Democrats are accusing Republicans of either being racially insensitive or not standing up to President Trump when he makes comments or retweets stuff. The incident after Charlottesville when he said there were good people on both sides. And then you have this pressure and this tension within the Democratic Party where true progressives are saying we've never really done enough for African Americans and they're not being represented in this party.
And we've reached out to Senator McCaskill and State Senator Chappelle Nadal. We did not hear back from either of them. Shannon, let us know if you get an update. Thank you, Allison. All right, what was thought to be the Republicans' best chance to pick up a governor's seat is now much less certain. That's because what was a three-person race in Alaska is now a head-to-head battle, and the math is changing. Correspondent Dan Springer tells us all about it from Anchorage.
How are you? Let me squeeze over there. Thank you.
Alaska's race for governor, pitting former Democratic U.S. Senator Mark Begich.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thanks for coming.
Against former state senator Republican Mike Dunleavy, might appear conventional. It's not. Missing is the incumbent governor, Bill Walker, an independent who dropped out 12 days ago. So late his name will still appear on the ballot. The stunning move gave life to Begich, who polls showed was splitting the liberal and moderate vote with Walker.
It was hard in a three-way because people were kind of looking at which one is the right one, but now it's changed, and there's huge momentum.
Governor Walker bailed 3 days after his lieutenant governor and running mate resigned abruptly after making an inappropriate comment to a woman. Walker then threw his support to Begich, who, like him, is open to new taxes and lowering oil and gas fund dividend checks to every Alaskan in order to close a huge budget deficit. Dunleavy says he can do it by cutting spending and would consider trimming Medicaid, which added $44,000 to the insured. Alaskans are used to bizarre elections. Icon Ted Stevens was only defeated because of a federal corruption guilty verdict a week before the vote. Senator Lisa Murkowski lost her 2010 Republican primary, then retained the seat with a stunning write-in victory. Mike Dunleavy appeared to be cruising to an easy win before the shakeup, but seems unfazed by the new Walker-Begich alliance.
Both of these guys were running to the far left to begin with. We designed our race against running against an individual that would be on the left. And right now, things are working well.
The Republican Governors Association realizes it will lose at least a few of the seats, the 33 seats it currently has around the country. But Alaska has always been viewed as one of the best chances for a pickup, one of the few chances really in the country for a pickup. But a poll that just came out today shows this race in Alaska a dead heat. Shannon?
All right, Dan Springer, thank you very much. Be careful of the moose. We see the sign behind you there. Be safe.
Yes,
thanks, Dan.
Okay.
All right, the Taliban 5 swapped in a controversial deal for Army Sergeant Bo Bergdahl a few years back. Well, they've rejoined the Taliban. They're supposed to be negotiating peace, but there are new doubts tonight about that and new debate about whether the Obama administration should have released them from Guantanamo Bay. Former CIA station chief Dan Hoffman is here live to talk about that and more next.
Has given us assurances that it will put in place measures to protect our national security.
President Obama negotiated a controversial prisoner swap in 2014, exchanging 5 Taliban members for former Army Sergeant Bo Bergdahl. This week, we've learned that they've joined the Taliban's political operation. Now, our next guest knows all about the 5. Fox News contributor and former CIA station chief Dan Hoffman is here to talk about that. Dan, welcome. Great to have you. We understand that they are now going to be responsible for part of the peace negotiations in Afghanistan. Who are these guys?
Yeah, they're not just Taliban members. These are 5 senior, hardened battlefield leaders of the Taliban. They're former chief of the army, they're former deputy intelligence chief. These are guys who were tight with Mullah Omar. and some with Osama bin Laden. And if, at the end of the day, ending the war is going to depend on reconciliation between the Afghanistan government in Kabul and the Taliban, that's what our former special representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan, Richard Olson, used to say. He was also ambassador in Pakistan, so knows a thing about the region. I'm not so sure I see how these 5 guys are going to help us get there, frankly. And there was a lot of concern, I remember at the time, I was chief of the CIA's Near East Division, Middle East, North Africa, about giving up those 5 guys in exchange for Sergeant Bergdahl because there's such a negative would make a negative impact on our efforts.
Well, now they're going to be at the negotiating table, apparently, so we will watch that as that happens. Now, I want to turn to former ambassador, now National Security Advisor John Bolton, talking about the fact that this new round of sanctions are going to kick in against Iran as part of lifting the Iran nuclear deal. Here's what he says about the impact.
We want to achieve maximum pressure, but we don't want to harm friends and allies either. And we're working our way through that.
But they're coming.
Yeah, it almost sounds mutually exclusive to me, that we want to drive up the pressure on Iran. In order to do that, we and our allies are going to have to feel some economic pain. At the end of the day, there are some countries like India and Turkey that need Iranian crude oil. So what we really need are the Saudis to increase their production. The president has talked about that. And I think that may wind up being the key for us to soften the blow for these other nations who are our allies.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a tricky thing because as we were talking about during the commercial, it's really a jigsaw puzzle over there. Our interest versus the interest there and the fact that we need the Saudis' help on this oil issue if we're going to crack down on Iran. Now, you know, a number of GOP lawmakers have reached out to the White House. They've authored a letter saying they want us to stop, given what's going on with the Saudis in recent days, stop some negotiations over a nuclear program. Here's what the letter says, signed onto by Senators Rubio, Gardner, Young, Heller, and Paul. The ongoing revelations about the murder of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi, as well as certain Saudi actions related to Yemen and Lebanon, have raised further serious concerns about the transparency, accountability, and judgment of current decision makers in Saudi Arabia. We therefore request that you suspend any related negotiations for a U.S.-Saudi civil nuclear agreement for the foreseeable future. Does that happen?
I mean, they're concerned about the lack of transparency and accountability resulting from Khashoggi's murder. And they're concerned about the Saudis having access to technology which would probably give them some breakout capability to process plutonium and enrich uranium. Those are legitimate concerns, but this is reportedly an $80 billion deal for Westinghouse to build 16 power plants over the next 25 years. If we don't do it, South Korea, France, maybe Russia or China will do it. I think the administration is going to have to go down to Congress and explain our policy to the Congress and also press the Saudis for the transparency and accountability that we need to move forward.
Yeah, it sounds much like the balancing act we're trying to make with the huge arms sales as well. As the president talked about it, it is a significant impact economically and on jobs here as well, and this nuclear conversation maybe as well.
Right.
All right, Daniel Hoffman, thank you. Always great to have you.
Thank you.
All right, how is the newest Supreme Court justice faring? After a grueling confirmation battle, we'll take you behind the scenes with Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Justice Brett Kavanaugh wrapping up his second week of oral arguments, settling into his role on the nation's highest courts. We take you inside the marbled walls for a look at a unique job and how his colleagues are treating the newcomer.
I will always be a team player on the team of 9.
Newly minted Justice Brett Kavanaugh thanking the president, the nation, and his 8 new colleagues, all seated near him in a show of support. Just a day later, he was mixing it up on the bench in his first oral arguments, chatting with his new neighbor and old friend, Justice Elena Kagan.
And I think she was making a sort of public show of, you know, he was part of what he would call the team of 9, and he was one of them. And right after the arguments ended, that first day, you know, she gave him a big handshake.
Sources say the 114th justice is fitting in well with the hectic pace and unusual rhythms of the nation's highest court, warmly embraced by his colleagues, no questions asked, and comfortable enough to crack a sly joke in only his second day of arguments.
I actually do think, on reflection, that manufacturer needs to warn about that, right?
So you just changed the answer?
I did.
Okay,
so,
just making sure.
Absolutely.
Just a day after being officially sworn in an otherwise empty court building, Kavanaugh met on a Sunday with his new law clerks to go over the looming caseload. Sources say he admitted privately to needing a lot of help. After those first few hectic days, he settled into his new chambers with lots of pictures of his 2 daughters gracing the walls, along with sports memorabilia for this rabid baseball fan. He's hired staff, including 4 law clerks, all female, a court first. As the new guy on the bench, Kavanaugh keeps it simple, asking short, textual questions in the public sessions, deferring to his colleagues and avoiding soliloquies or harsh rhetoric. And after barely surviving Senate scrutiny over allegations of sexual misconduct, Kavanaugh is back wearing his familiar robe.
The nice thing that I've seen over the last 2 or 3 weeks is really him transitioning back into the role that he's most comfortable in, which is as a judge and now as a justice.
And by the way, there's some unique things that the newest justice has to do, meaning now Justice Kavanaugh. One of the things is they have to serve on the cafeteria committee. Justice Kagan has become very famous over the court because during her time in the committee, she makes sure that they added a frozen yogurt machine to the lunchroom there over at Supreme Court. It's self-serve, and you get to put on your own toppings, so I give her a total thumbs up for that. But also the newest justice has to be the one that sits in the by the door when they have these private conferences and votes. They have to vote last, and they have to answer the door no matter who knocks. So we'll see. Justice Neil Gorsuch only got to do it for a year. We'll see how long Brett Kavanaugh does it this time around. In the meantime, most watched, most trusted, most grateful you spent your evening with us. Good night from Washington. I'm Shannon Bream. Stick around for the one and only Tucker Carlson.